Well, thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce David Kaplan, who will be serving as the moderator of today's keynote panel. David is the Stern Family Endowed Professor of Engineering at Tufts. He's also a distinguished university professor and, of course, a professor in the Department of Biomedical Engineering. Now, I promised him not to read any more of his bio because he's well known to all of you, but I want to make 2 points. Besides David's expertise, as you all know, in this field and other fields related to engineering of tissues and biopolymers, he's also quite the role model at Tufts for what the scientific innovator and collaborator should be. Several years ago, we did a collaboration map between the 8 schools that were mentioned in the video, because it's one of the unique things about Tufts to see how they were collaborating. Well, the map showed only one node, and that was David, and all lines came out from him. So that, I think, speaks for itself. And the second thing I've learned after 12 years at Tufts as a president, there's only 2 types of undergraduates at Tufts. Those that are working in David Kaplan's lab and those that would wish they were working in David Kaplan's lab. So with that, I give you David Kaplan. Thank you.
It's very weird that we had just 100% response for those that were invited, which is just remarkable. I think it speaks to 2 things. One is the network that's being established by the leaders we'll have up here in a minute, that's already growing and having an impact, and just the urgency for what we're all trying to accomplish with this technology and its impact. So thank you, everyone. If we could get our 4 first panelists up here while I add a little bit to that. I think what's important, we decided to kick this off with what I consider 4 pioneers in the field. And I don't need to give you their CVs and all that, unlike Tony. I like to just tell you something more personal about each of them. Uma will be on Zoom. He's the only one that couldn't make it in person. But we know all these folks very well. I will tell you some personal stories. Let me start on right here with Mark. So I think, again, most of you know our pioneers quite well already, but Mark has been just a stalwart in the field from the very beginning. Obviously, you know about his UK burger 10 years ago now. Think about that, 10 years ago. And it's good to think about where we were 10 years ago and where we are today. Remarkable progress, okay, going on in the field. And Mark has also been an incredible lab for training students, some of who are now working in our lab, and I can always count on them to be really good scientists. So I thank Mark for that as well. And then the last bit for Mark is, as many of you know, he runs an annual meeting on cultivated meat and food at Maastricht. And many of my students go, I go. I encourage all of you to go because it's really a centerpiece for the field and has been for many years. So for those reasons, aside from his amazing background and what he's doing, and he'll talk about this, thank you to Mark. Number 2 is Isha. Those of you, I think many of you know Isha as well. Isha is just one incredible person, period. And as you know, she's also been the pioneer for many of us who know New Harvest very well. But I would like to call her out for one really important thing. Very early in her work as director of New Harvest, she and the team decided that what they wanted to do was fund stipends to PhD students, okay? And it may sound trivial because they didn't fund a lot of them, right? But there was, if you go back 8, 9, 10 years, there was 0 public funding to support students. So it was very difficult for the academic world to get going in this field, including our lab. And fortuitously, she funded a couple of students who ended up in my lab, and you know them all, between Natalie, Andrew, and others. And I just think it was a visionary approach because these are now emerging from our labs, mine and others, as leaders in cell ag space, because they're 100% dedicated to what we're all trying to accomplish here. So for that and many other reasons, it's just a joy to have you here to talk to everybody. Thank you for coming. Third is Bruce. Again, you all know Bruce, I think, through GFI. Amazing team that Bruce has put together all around the world. If you're not aware, whatever country you're in, wherever you go, you'll find leaders in the field. And I was talking to Bruce just before. They're not just leaders and knowledgeable, they're just amazing people. They really care for the right reasons. So it's a joy for that. And if you're not aware as well, GFI had a program mainly through Claire to fund small grants to get academics like me and others into the field to do things. And we had a small grant on fish, and Claire made sure we all got together by Zoom mostly to talk about our research, more transparency with research. And it's through there I met other faculty that I didn't know, and that led to our USDA grant, because my colleague Reza, I don't know where he is, he's out there somewhere at Virginia Tech, is essentially my co-director of our large USDA program. So that would never have happened without GFI and the leadership of Bruce. So again, you can read a CV, but these are the things that matter to me and really matter to our students, I think, as well. Uma, I think, is on Zoom. I don't know if you can, oh, there you are. Hi, Uma. I think he's somewhere in Europe or Middle East. I can't remember, but okay. So you all know Uma. I don't need to introduce Uma, but I will say something more personal about Uma as well. From the very, very beginning, the first time I met him many, many years ago, he's been just an incredible supporter of academic activities in this field, being very willing to pitch in, help, support, et cetera. So he's done that from the very beginning. His colleagues at Upside also are very willing to get involved, whether it's giving lectures, talking to students, hosting students at their plants, and so on. And so again, you need that industrial support to balance some of the academics that are starting to grow in this space as well. And for that, again, Uma has been just a leader, just a very dependable individual in industry that's really been with us all the way along the process. All right. Now that we've taken between Tony and myself half the time we have for this panel, we're going to do the best we can. So we're going to move on to actual questions for the panel, okay? And we'll try and leave some time for questions from the audience, but the rate we're going probably won't happen. So I thought we'd start a question first just to give us your sense of the status of the field. Where do you think the field is today after about 10 years post-cooking the burger on public television, and then we'll get into some other issues there. Maybe Mark, we could start with you, if that's all right.
Sure. This is working, yes. Yeah, so first of all, let me say I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to see that there's major academic funding now coming up. I've been lobbying this for about 15 years, and it's gradually starting to happen. So you see how long these things take. But then again, you have to be grateful that eventually it does happen. So, and congratulations that you are one of the pioneers in that. Where the field is now, when we, so we are now having like between 100 and 150 companies in cellular agriculture worldwide, which is a major endeavor in a relatively short period of time. And it speaks of the need for this to happen. But also the enthusiasm in many different countries where you always find people who want to make this happen. So a lot of companies, a lot of activity, and when we started in 2013 with that hamburger, we never envisioned that that was kind of the starting site of this whole industry, which I'm really grateful for in retrospect. Currently, it's still a lot of R&D activity, and that's understandable because it's a rather complex technology to get it right and to scale it up and to make it cost effective. So there are a number of hurdles that you have to take. None of them are unsurmountable, but the number of them just makes it like a time-consuming and resource-consuming endeavor. So that's all understandable. Where we are now at is that we are kind of at the verge of getting regulatory approval in a couple of geographies, and some already have a regulatory approval where some factories are being built. So we are really getting to a level where it becomes sort of semi-industrial, if you like. And that's, of course, from the very beginning, the aim to get there. And I'm very happy to see that this is now happening. Still, takes a long time, and it will take a long time before it will be a substantial part of the market where eventually we can make an impact on the environment, which is the root of all this. But it's happening. And there were a lot of criticism, I guess, or skepticism about whether this would ever happen at scale. And you now see that this is happening. Where I'm a little bit more concerned is that we are still far from cost effectiveness, also relatively far from resource efficiency, which is also understandable, but it's something that we need to work on in the future quite extensively, and also to get to the quality of the products that we eventually envision. So it's also understandable that the early products that come to the market may not have the quality that we expect, but we need to focus on getting that quality. It was a long answer. Right?
That's great. Thank you, Mark. Isha.
So I like thinking of where we are today relative to where we were 10 years ago. And so 10 years ago, I feel like you could count the number of people dedicated to cellular agriculture on one hand, maybe two. A lot of them were in Mark's lab. And when I think about where we are today, to reflect on what Mark said about it's happening, I think 10 years ago, we didn't know for sure, is it going to happen? Because we didn't have all these activated people pushing it forward from their different perspectives all around the world. And I think to see 10 years go by and to see 150 companies pop up, so much private investment pop up, lots more people in academic space, to me, it's like, okay, the party has been started and there are people in the room. And the fact that we could even have this many people in the room who are activated around cellular agriculture is such a big win. So to me, these first 10 years were almost like a 0 to 1 moment. Okay, we've arrived. And now the next 10 years are, now that we've arrived, what are we going to do? And so the announcements in these next 10 years are not going to be a new company, a new product, the first this, the first that. They're going to be a lot more interesting. I think it'll be, how do these different players in the field work together? What are the things they're going to create together? What are the unique approaches to building things collaboratively? How are we going to solve this puzzle in different ways? Because as much as there are lots of people in the field right now, I think there's also a lot of room for redundancy, because we're all kind of starting from the same place. We didn't come from academia in the kind of classic sense of a lot of those companies coming out of academic places or relying on the kind of same foundation of academic work. So the next 10 years are going to be very, very interesting. And I think the state of the industry is, okay, we're all here, and now let's see what are the cool things that are going to happen going forward. It's going to be a matter of flavor and approach this next little bit.
Thank you, Isha. Bruce.
So thank you so much for the invitation, David, and thank you to Tufts. I really thought Tony's introduction and the video were just spectacular. And thank you for your kind words about GFI. So for folks who don't know, GFI is actually 6 NGOs, as David nodded at. There's GFI in India, Israel, Brazil, Asia Pacific, which is based out of Singapore, and then we have some partners in China. And then Europe, we have an office in Brussels and a team in London. And I think the answer to your question is how much more government support can we get to generate more scientists? So GFI, we have about 180, I think, full-time team members around the world, about half in the US, half outside the US. The plurality are scientists. And our global battle cry is building on what Mark flagged, that government should be funding this. So I think it's pretty easy to look around at how successful electric vehicles have been, to look around at how successful renewable energy is now and the cost curve plummeting. That's because governments recognized that how we deal with fossil fuels is we replace them with renewable energy. How we deal with combustion engines is we replace them with electric vehicles. And so, these are the pioneers. Isha literally coined the term cellular agriculture, who have generated the excitement that gets us where we are. At this point, we really need governments to recognize. I thought Tony said something just super incisive in his introduction, which at GFI we sum up as no plan B. There have been 11 peer review articles looking at what 2050 is going to look like in terms of industrial animal agriculture. The lowest prediction is 62% more. The book Diet for a Small Planet was written 50 years ago. Animal product consumption in the last 50 years has done this. Literally 100% of scientists predict that that's what's going to happen for the next 30 years as well. And there is no plan B. We're not going to convince the world to consume fewer animal products. So we need to figure out how to deal with the issues that Mark flagged. We need to figure out how to bring the prices down. We need to figure out how to scale up these technologies. And that's going to be a function of governments helping us to build the ecosystem. It's going to be a function of governments putting, in the last 3 years, they've gone from almost zero to hundreds of millions. We have at GFI met with success literally in every country where we operate. Our global battle cry is that governments should be funding the science, and government should be incentivizing private sector activity, so that Mark with Mosa and Uma with Upside don't have to shell out $500 million in venture capital money for a factory. They need the same sorts of supports that renewable energy and electric vehicles have gotten. So that's our global battle cry. Government should be funding this in the same way that they've been funding and incentivizing renewable energy and electric vehicles. And I think we can, solve the problems that we're all identifying and get a lot more money for David's lab if we all work very, very hard to pitch this as a critical solution and an essential solution. There really is no plan B.
Thank you, Bruce. Uma.
Hey, David, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
All right, great. Well, first of all, I really appreciate you inviting me to join the inaugural panel and to be at the first inaugural TUCA meeting. I'm on the other side of the world, would love to be there, and I'm exactly 12 hours apart. And in case the bandwidth is not great and I start slowing down, feel free to interrupt me. I won't think it's rude. My best to keep my answers crisp. And just to quickly introduce myself and Upside Foods, I'm a cardiologist by training. I trained at the Mayo Clinic and found Upside Foods in 2015 and moved the company to the Bay Area from Minnesota. I'd been on the board of New Harvest when Isha was starting us as executive director, working with Jason Matane at that point. I was here involved on the day one of GFI launching. In fact, they launched on the same day as we previewed our beef meatball. And I've known Mark Post for many, many, many years. And Mark, thank you for inviting me to your amazing conference in Maastricht. And it was incredible to meet you there and encourage and push each other to move the field forward. And I've known Isha for just as long, and I want to thank all of you for writing your papers that got this field started. So, David, your question was, where is the field right now? So I want to make sure that I answered it in two parts. The first part is, like, imagine you're back in 2005 or 2000, that's when I started thinking about this, or 2008, when I was injecting into patients' hearts, the cardiomyocytes to regrow the cardiac muscle. And Mark was trying to come up with this, the demonstration of the first burger. Isha was getting New Harvest kickstarted to really start training people. And Bruce, you have to tell me what you're doing then, but you were thinking about this from an entirely different perspective of, like, we need to get rid of animal agriculture. I think, David, you were in biomaterials and you do lots of regenerative work, silk. And in medicine, we talk about an industry, well, we talk about births, and I've delivered a number of babies, and Mark has in our medical school. And when babies are born, they're given something called APGAR score. And Virginia APGAR is the one who came up with APGAR score. And she said, you'd evaluate a baby based on, I think there's like 5 criteria: appearance and pulse, and is a baby. And on a scale of 0 to 10, you want to get a 10, but very few babies get 10. And 7 is what's considered a good score. It doesn't mean if you get a 1 or 2 that the baby is not going to survive. It's just that you have to do a lot of support and respiration, suction. So Mark, I'd be curious to think what the APGAR was when we first started, but I think the APGAR was 0 or 1. Nobody gave this a chance, and there was an enormous amount of skepticism.
Zero is dead, right?
Yeah, that's why I said 0 to 1, right? It was literally a score there, like no one who was willing to give this industry a chance. So I just want to pause and thank everybody on the panel and David and a number of people in the audience. You have been instrumental in getting this field off from an APGAR of 0 to 1 to if you ask me where it is now, I'd say we're getting close to a 7. And it's incredible because in the span of 6 years, at least if I talk about commercialization or industries, true industry starting with external funding from 2016 to now, 6 years, we've had 150 companies and growing. Almost every meat producing, meat consuming country has a company wanting to do this. We have incredible non across the world, New Harvest, GFI, and many others. We have PhD programs, undergrad programs in major universities, the top food and ag universities, and Tufts, you're leading the way there. Graduating PhDs. I mean, Natalie Rubio graduating, and Andrew and John coming out there, a huge testament, and New Harvest funding these fellows, and GFI also funding them now. And now getting regulatory approval and sold in Singapore, first ever regulatory approval in the US with the FDA. And these are incredible for an industry that is very early, and it's like a baby in infancy. And I've seen the industry sputter, cough, stop breathing, restart. And I think that's all very healthy. This is something that needs to happen in the world. It's being born and it's continuing to grow. So I'd say I couldn't be happier if I look back and say how we are today. Status is incredible. We've gone from no chance, unachievable, 0 to 1, to proving viability. Everybody here has proven the viability of cultivated meat as you could grow this scientifically, it's viable. So that's the first phase. The next phase is this phase that's incredibly important, just as hard. We are probably starting at an APGAR of 1 to 2 at this point, because this next phase is all about scalability. Can we scale production? Can we bring it to a cost that seems meaningful? And I'll guarantee there's skeptics, just as there have been before, but this is how progress happens. And I think a very healthy academic environment, a healthy and robust industry, robust private public sector partnerships, and constructive critiques. We have all of these right now, which we didn't have before. So I couldn't be more optimistic. I'm going to ask everybody to stay focused on the North Star, so we keep moving forward. So that's my answer. I'm incredibly enthusiastic about the field and all the work that's happening.
Thank you, Uma. All right, round two. Some of you touched on this already in terms of not just where we are, but the next question really is, where do you see the biggest challenge or challenges? And I know Uma just mentioned sort of the next scaling and so on, but any thoughts there? We could start again with Mark, where you see the next few years we've got to solve problems, if you will.
Well, in addition to the kind of industrialization, so scaling and getting to price parity, what I mentioned is getting the quality right. So I'm a big proponent on improving the differentiation of the tissues, both the muscle tissues and the fat tissues, and maybe eventually fibrous tissues. And that is still in its infancy. That still has an APGAR score of 5 or less, right? So that's where we really need to make a leap. And a lot of us come from the medical tissue engineering field, and we know how hard it is to get a tissue that looks and feels, and in our case, tastes exactly the same. So that's where I see kind of the academic challenge. And I didn't say that, but what I feel, and that's why I've been lobbying to governments and to universities to start working on this, because this is a field, even if products come to the market this year, is a field that is going to improve over the next 30 years, right? This is a long-term endeavor to get better and better quality, getting it cheaper, getting it at scale. So this is not a short-term kind of endeavor. You need to be in this for the long haul. And that's why I think it's crucially important that we have public funding as well in this system.
Thanks, Mark. Isha.
So I'll agree. What we need to do is figure out these scale-up questions, but that's going to require shared facilities. Shared facilities are going to be very expensive, and that requires the government funding. So echoing what the others have said, the experiments are only going to get more expensive going forward, and we do really need that infrastructure investment that allows us to do those experiments together, learn together, and figure out how to bring those prices down over time. And I agree, this is not just putting products in the market. This is a long-term field that's going to improve for decades to come, as Mark said. I would say it even go further than 30 years because we still have meat science as a discipline today. So, that will never change. Like the need for improvement will never change.
My time horizon is a little bit shorter than yours.
Well, I'm not saying it won't be viable in 30 years.
Optimism,
I'm just
Mark,
saying
optimism.
that the innovation is going to continue for a long time. There's what I loved Uma's example of cellular agriculture as a baby. I think that's such a beautiful image. Like there's a baby here, and what does it take to raise a child? A village. The village is here too. And so when we think about this next phase of growth, it is also about what are the values that we're going to advance cellular agriculture with? How are we going to raise cellular agriculture so it actually does do these things that we want for the environment, which is actually be sustainable, actually reduce the need for animal products, et cetera, et cetera. And we have to acknowledge that those things are not really incentivized through the regular corporate structure of things. So as we raise this baby, how do we make sure that that North Star is very much focused on those sustainability goals? And those are as critical to the success of cellular agriculture as scale up, as products in the market. Because there is a future where we have products in the market and they don't really help reduce that number of animals that Bruce cited. And so we can't lose sight of those goals along the way.
Great, thanks, Bruce.
So a couple of years ago, GFI contracted with one of the top firms for techno-economic analyses, a firm in Belgium called CE Delft. And CE Delft signed NDAs with 14 companies, including some of the top slaughterhouse design and biochemical companies, as well as I think 8 or 9 cultivated meat companies, as well as the basically the NSF of Singapore, ASAR, the Agency for Science, Technology and Research. So we have a fairly deep dive answer to the question, and it's basically exactly what Mark said the first time he spoke, which is if we're going to bring these products to cost parity, we have a lot of very significant places that we need to focus. And I think, as Isha just intimated, if we do all of that in silos, it's going to take a very long time. And so that's why the government support that Mark has been advocating for such a long time is so critically important. I will say in the omnibus bill that passed in December, GFI got 4 of our top priorities into the omnibus bill, including one of the standalone bills that we had introduced alongside a C4 called Food Solutions Action. We have seen, 3 years ago, there was basically 0 government funding other than the original funds that started Mark's lab more than a decade ago. We've now seen hundreds of millions of dollars go into this space. And the pitch to governments, if they care about renewable energy, and if they care about climate, biodiversity, global health, the pitch is this is the one solution to food and ag that analogizes to renewable energy and electric vehicles. It's the one solution that recognizes that there will be more of these products consumed, but we can eliminate the external costs by moving to cellular and plant-based agriculture. Just like the renewable energy success recognizes that more energy will be consumed, just like the success of electric vehicles recognizes that more cars will be sold and we eliminate the external costs, exact same concept here. And that is working. And then I will say with Republicans saying this is jobs and this is economy, and creating a bit of both cooperation and competition among governments, looking at President Xi talking about alternative proteins, looking at the China 5-year bioeconomy and the China 5-year ag plan. And we're even making inroads with Republicans. Our first piece of standalone legislation had 3 Republican co-sponsors. So the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office published a study. It said 2050, $1.1 trillion from alternative proteins, 9.8 million new jobs. That really works in our conversations with Republicans as well. So getting governments to put billions and billions of dollars into this, I think can help us drive down cost curves, help us sponsor the infrastructure and manufacturing that Isha just flagged as so essential.
Thank you, Bruce. Uma, do you want to comment?
Of course. I mean, people challenges and scalability issues. A couple things I want to mention are consumer education. Products launching into the market, it doesn't matter at what scale, are incredibly important to start telling the story, because access to a consumer is something we cannot ignore. Of course, academia needs to progress, science has to progress, and companies have to do their thing, can be profitable, but the person at the final receiving side of it is a consumer. And consumer acceptance, consumer access is incredibly important. So, I mean, I know we want to continue to progress on, how to make this industry really successful, viable, but the consumer has to come along it. So that's one of the challenges. So I would encourage, people in the audience, companies, even academia, if there is a way to work really safely, quickly with the regulators, get your products to get the seal of approval or green light in whichever country your company is, it does an incredible service to this entire community. So that's important to bring the consumer along. I want to bring us back to this industry being like a baby that is being raised by all of us, right? And let's think about I have 2 kids. Parenting philosophies change. Parenting philosophies, ultimately the parents want the best for their kid. And they have incredibly fierce debates of how to raise the child. And I think we'll go through that in this field as well. There will be incredibly passionate conversations about, let's go this way, the field should go this way, and this is the right way to do it. It should only be in industry, or there should be something else that has to happen. Or the field has a setback, and there'll be people that'll come and predict, oh, it's done. There's no chance for this field. I can guarantee virtually this is going to happen to us, but it's important to, and the North Star is the child. The child has to grow, and let's not focus on the child, because as a parent, I can tell you, I had my parenting philosophies and my wife had hers, but my child has its own philosophy. The kids always think that our philosophy is not growing up. It develops a mind on its own. So the companies and the academia and this group moving this forward, look, it's going to be hard to predict, but let's give it all the freedom, direct it to go one way or the other. Let's prioritize action. Now, talk is cheap. I know all of us are very happy to sit and talk, and I'm grateful to be on this panel, but we got to go back and be in the arena and get the work done. So that's what I would say. That's our North Star. And that's the big challenge, not get distracted by skeptics or critiques. Take the constructive criticism as we can, but keep moving forward. And I think that's the challenge in this field, that it seems so daunting and overwhelming. It could be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. I just don't think it's a long horizon at all. Look, meat's been around for thousands of years. What we're trying to do here is an incredible task. And any bold initiative that we've seen in our lifetimes on transformative change has taken time. I mean, look at electrification of transportation. It's been around for 25 years. Tesla started somewhere in 2003, went public in 2008. It's 15 years later. And only 1 to 2% of the cars in the United States are electric cars. But they have influenced almost every manufacturer to commit towards electrification of transportation. That's really what we should keep in mind. And David, Mark, we should not be disappointed if it happens in 20, 30 years, because it's every single day is exciting in this field, and we're moving. It's a very short horizon. So maybe it's my view of things, but this is how I think about change, and I want to make sure that we're not ignoring it. And if we ignore that, it's a challenge.
Thank you, Uma. All right, another round. We've again touched on this already in each of your comments, but now take us to your vision for the future. What do you, if you could raise all the money you want, if you could do everything you think you want to do, how do you see us, looking forward the next 1, 5, 10, 20 years of cell ag? What is it going to look like in the best of all worlds?
How come you don't have to answer the questions?
Because you're our pioneers. We look to you for guidance. Of course, Isha.
Yeah. Well, of course, this is this is going to happen, right? There's no question. So that means that 5-10 years from now, we as consumers have the choice. And I think, yes, Uma emphasized that consumers also need to accept this. And it is going to be a hurdle. I don't think it's going to be a big hurdle though, because every discussion that we have, we feel that consumers are kind of ready for this, and they are at least ready to steer away from their original choices, because we all the meat eaters, and I'm one of them, have kind of this simmering guilt feeling, and we want to get rid of that, while at the same time not giving up our consumption pattern. So I think that's a big drive towards consumer acceptance. So 5-10 years from now, we will have the choice, and we will have the choice of a lot of cell egg products. We are seeing them now in dairy, but we also will see them in various qualities of meat and various species of meat. And I'm very much looking forward to that. So I have no doubt that that's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. And beyond that, at some point, we will have a sort of tipping point. I hate the word tipping point because it's kind of a theoretical thing, but we will have at least a momentum where the challenge for conventional meat the challenge will be shifted towards conventional meat producers and no longer to cultured meat producers.
I think what's important in these next 10 years, but maybe even more so in these next 2 years, is that cellular agriculture isn't framed around just the animal replacement anymore, that we actually see it as a completely new sustenance strategy for humanity. And we think of it as big as the invention of agriculture 12,000 something years ago. And so every time we see a new product on the market, we shouldn't just be thinking about meat. We should also be thinking about these other products, honey, chocolate, vanilla, blah, 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 because those products pave the way for cellular agriculture. And I think sometimes we draw a lot of parallels to these plant-based products, which also pave the way, but in a different way. These other cell culture products are making cell ag more acceptable and get us closer to that social acceptance of the meat. And the dairy products in the market have done a lot to lay that baseline understanding of what is cell ag. Oh, this is interesting. You know, that broadness is going to be very, very important for this to succeed, because we should be just as excited about one protein made in cell culture as we will be about these burgers, et cetera, down the line. I think another important thing to keep in our vision is this question of how do we make sure our values remain at the center of the pursuit of cell ag. To me, maybe I differ from Uma a little bit, where he says the North Star is the baby. To me, the North Star is what the baby does. What does the baby do for the world that we want to see? Does it actually create this more sustainable future for us? And can we actually create this new sustenance strategy for humanity that unlocks all kinds of abundance for us on Earth? So we need to be thinking that big. And so these next 10 years are, how do we make sure that we keep that center to the expansion of the cell ag field? And that's going to take a lot of creativity, because we haven't done a lot of that so far in history.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned a couple minutes ago that GFI's sort of global battle cry is that governments should be basically giving Tufts a lot more money for your Center for Cellular Excellence, and then lots more of these sorts of centers. And lots more private sector incentives. So I mentioned the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office report. They suggest that with $10.1 billion in global investment, about $4.4 billion for centers like the Tufts centers, and then 5.7 to help Mark and Uma, incentives like the incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act, $350 million there. In one bill, that those sorts of things, that's what gets us to the $1.1 trillion industry by 2050 and 10 million jobs. So I think really leaning in on the analogy and leaning in on the point that Tony made that this is, I mean, if you look at something like the Paris Climate Agreement, the scientific consensus is in. If there is more animal agriculture, we're going to blow past the 1.5 degree goal. The first goal is keep temperature change below 1.5 relative to pre-industrial levels. The backup plan is 2. The scientific consensus is if animal agriculture goes up, we blow past 1.5 and 2.0 is probably out of reach. What this means is that the scientific consensus about the increase in animal agriculture through 2050 means Paris is impossible. And this is literally the only thing that anybody is talking about on the food and ag side that can challenge that 60 to more than twice as much meat by 2050. So Uma pointed out Tesla founded in 2003, and we're still very early on the trajectory of electric vehicles. And if you read the Wall Street Journal, you will see them consistently saying we're never even going to get there on electric vehicles. And the thing is, electric vehicles, the batteries, they need cobalt from the Congo. They need lithium from Uyghur areas in China. They need all kinds of the precious metals. You talk about renewable energy, they're literally chopping down forests to put up solar farms because renewable energy requires 10 times as much land relative to fossil fuels. In both of those cases, we have the opposite thing going on with alternative proteins. It is a much more tractable problem than renewable energy and electric vehicles. And what, we've on government funding, we've gone from basically zero to hundreds of millions of dollars, and we need more. But in just a couple of years, we've gone from zero to hundreds of millions of dollars. We need to get the NGO and policy community that cares about climate, biodiversity, global health, global development. We need to get them to recognize that this is essential to their goals so that we can really get up to billions of dollars in funding. And I'm optimistic that we're going to get there. And that will allow the vision that we're all talking about to happen so much more quickly.
Thanks, Bruce. Uma.
Great, thank you. The vision for the industry, starting off from just go with the FDA green light for bringing cultivated products into the United States and passing it on to the next step. I think the immediate thing is for USDA to also be able to finish the grant of inspection, train actors in how to work with cultivated meat production facilities, and getting a label in front of the consumer is important. When we talk about a label, I think it's been great to see in the last year, all the companies and also NGOs and trade associations in the world coming together predominantly under the umbrella of one commercial name. It's really important to avoid consumer confusion, because if each of us call it something else and we had to explain the differences to consumer, this field could be dead on arrival. So I'm very happy to see the cultivated as the most accepted term that's coming out into the world. So I would expect that we'll have labels that will say cultivate, pick the species chicken or, salmon or something else like that. And as we look ahead, the FDA and USDA green light as regulatory agencies means a lot for this industry, because they have for the first time fully done a publicly vetted process with a lot of detailed documentation and back and forth from every company that's applying. And that offers a blueprint for the industry and for the ecosystem to grow. And my vision is that kind of becomes that beacon that people can look at and start saying regulatory approvals can happen across in multiple countries in the world. And I'm really heartened to see GFI and international with regulators across China as well as Middle East and Europe. It's important to get people along and show them that there is a blueprint. It could continue to get improved, but you start off and take a field from 0 to 1, and it's going to continue to get better. And there's lots of partnerships that will form. People in this room, people on the panel, and newer technologies that will come through. And I think that's going to be really important. And David, you started an incredible movement. Lots of academic groups are going to look at you and say, he's a pioneer. He built an entire training program for undergrads and PhDs, and we want to replicate that. At the center now, you're going to get a program grant, and there's more people that'll be getting it. And Mark, I hope you can go back to Netherlands and also to compete here and create a global talent for our industry. So I think that's an important one for us to continue to grow. And I think it's really important to keep educating a lot of stakeholders. Public-private partnerships are a must-have for us to succeed. There is literally no industry that from idea to the impact without that public-private partnership happening. I'm glad that there's some funding that came into the field. Of course, $2+ billion that came in the last 6 years. But as Bruce pointed out, it is nothing compared to how much is needed and how much went into other industries like autonomous driving or transportation, or think about any industry that's grown fast. We require that level of investment. And I don't want anyone to be shy here and say we're spending a lot without seeing a lot. Of course, for a change like that, you've got to build a foundation. It has to be strong. If you start counting return on investment immediately, then it becomes transactional. And to talk about the values we need for this that we're building, if every single thing is transactional and foundation for the baby to really become strong and grow, it's really confusing. And one of the things I see as a vision for this industry is that I think we learn to communicate a lot better among ourselves. And we have to be very careful about not putting the level of expectations that have been on this field and industry from the time it's been out in the public domain. The amount, of course, all of us are reading what the media is writing. There is an incredible amount of hype. There's an incredible amount of expectations set on us. And I think one of the things is that's going to cause issues if you don't pay attention. And one of the values should be, look, we need to decrease, de-escalate, and not really continue to put all the stress on the baby to go really fast. It has the steps. If it falls, we should be able to say, it's okay to fall. It's okay to fail, make a mistake. Let's get you back up and start going back. And I think those are the kinds of things we have to talk about. So we're not spending too much time directing, controlling, but offering a safe space to continue to grow. So that's the one thing I would add in terms of values, which I agree are incredibly important for us.
Thank you, Uma. We're at our time. So first of all, just a personal thank you. I don't know that we've ever had these 4 leaders all on the same stage at the same time at any meeting. So I'm very thankful for all of you to take the time. And yes. 5 leaders. Oh, and obviously they'll be around except for Uma, right? So please engage at the breaks so you can partake of their wisdom, as I like to do as well. And let's just give them a great round of applause and thank them for the time.